Assalamu alaikum.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Allow me to again acknowledge my Quran and Arabic teachers, Hafiz Sahab, Sheikh Nazir, Sayyid Akbar, and today we have my Imam, my spiritual teacher, Imam Anwar. Also, I understand that some English-speaking guests will be arriving today, so allow me to use biblical names. I'll use Moses instead of Hazrat Musa. I will use Jacob for Yaqub. I will go back and forth for Allah and God, only because Allah seems to write so much easier on the breath. Allow me today to seek some guidance on Rushd. It will take us to the shorelines of Surah Kahf, the 18th chapter of the Holy Quran. Hazrat Musa, Moses, wanted to journey with Khidr to learn about Rushd. Those of you who are familiar with Surah Kahf know that it is far too wide, and any of its stories is far too deep and rich in themes and colors and facets for anyone to cover in a khutbah. It helps that Brother Yusuf Shahabi covered the story of Moses and Khidr in his khutbah a couple of weeks ago. My prayer is that in the little that I say and the much that I will fail to say, that you go back to the Quran and resume or launch your own study. To approach the Quran is like approaching a light source. The light reveals everything except itself. So in the pursuit of divine guidance, the one who approaches the Quran becomes the Quran's subject. The subject is offered insight into his or her own inner self. After all, that is where hidayah, guidance, rushd, meaning sound judgment with holistic consciousness, and shifa, meaning healing, are needed and received. But finding and getting there comes from earnest seeking. Remember that Hazrat Musa and his aide rested at the exact place where Khidr was, but they failed to see him. The aide stared at the fish as it burrowed across to the sea, but he was remiss because he was not the one looking for Khidr. But then after they moved on, and the aide tells Moses, Hazrat Musa, about the fish, Hazrat Musa retraces his steps back and he says, Zalika ma kunna nabghi. That is what we were seeking. Seeking and finding and getting there is a lifelong quest. It will stop only when the deserving have attained the gardens of Firdaus. This is what the Quran says at the end of Surah Kahf, and it uses the same word, yabghuna, khalidina fiha, la yabghuna anha hibala. Therein to abide, and they will not seek any change to it. The dictionary meaning of rushd is mature of mind, sound judgment, reason, sense, holistic consciousness. But rushd is a state and a mindset. Rashad is rushd in practice, in an action, in a situation, or in life's journey. Some translate it as rectitude, which is to behave sensibly while being guided by a moral compass. At one end of this broad scope, there is a very practical meaning. فَإِنْ أَنَسْتُم مِّنْهُمْ رُشْدًا فَادْفَعُوا عَلَيْهِمْ أَمْوَالُهُمْ. If you sense them sound of judgment, give them their wealth, give their wealth to them in their custody. It's talking about orphans. On the other hand, there is this usage which adds the spiritual and moral dimensions of rushd. After giving us the grand and magnificent throne verse, Ayatul Kursi, the eternal sovereign says, La ikraha fid deen, qad tabayyana al-rushdu min al-ghayy. There is no compulsion whatsoever in faith. Now distinct is the way of sound judgment and impulsive waywardness. Rushd by these two usages is similar to wisdom. One can be considered wise and prudent, but wisdom has no end. Rushd in a spiritual sense is a quest for a holistic, all-round consciousness. Expressing his commitment to learn about rushd, Moses says to his aide in these breathtaking words, La brahu hatta abluga majma al-bahraini or andiya hukba. I shall not quit until I reach the meeting place of two seas, or I run out time span. The meeting place of two seas is a catchy phrase, no doubt, but it defies definition and it defeats imagination. It is a spiritual signpost defined in earthly terms. We will come back to it. Rushd and its co-rooted word Rashad are one of the many themes in Surah Kahf. Moses wants to shadow Khidr to acquire lessons in rushd. The Quran does not tell us whether Hazrat Musa was a prophet then, or whether this journey with Khidr was the grooming of a prophet to be. Learning never stops. In the same surah, when the youth retreated to the cave, they prayed to Allah for rashad in their undertaking. And in the same surah again, the prophet who was chosen by God for his great morality, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَىٰ خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ, is counseled by God that he too should pray for ever closer alignment to his will while navigating his mission, Rashad. Before the Quran relates the story of Khidr and Musa, starting at verse 60, it preconditions us by confronting our notion of time and earthly facts with transcendent spiritual truths to break us free of our own dogmatic constructs. In the midst of telling us the story of the young men of the cave told before the story of Musa and Khidr, the supreme storyteller tells the Prophet and us, Nahnu nuqussu alayka naba'ahum bil haqq. A first pass translation, we relate the story of their episode to you with truth. However, when a believer is inspired with subsequent passes, he will seek and reach deeper meanings. Haqq is a multifaceted word. It can mean reality, it can mean right, it can mean truth. And in fact, Al-Haqq is one of Allah's attributes, meaning the absolute timeless reality, reality in all caps. Isn't every word of Allah the truth, the believer asks? Does God Al-Haqq even have to tell us that He is telling us the truth? So one could take this other layer of meaning. We relate the story of their episode to you with the sole right, or in its essence. In support of this translation, let me digress to this beautiful subverse of the Quran, which occurs multiple times with slight variations. It is easy to gloss over the depth of this verse. وَمَا خَلَقْنَا السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَمَا بَيْنَهُمَا إِلَّا بِالْحَقِّ. A first pass translation, we did not create the heavens and the earth and that which is between them except in expression of the truth. Ibn Arabi's inspired translation, we did not create the heavens and the earth and that which is between them except with the proper right. Soak that in for a minute. Everything which Allah has created has its right of existence. Each person and everything in this person's orbit has its right. People have a right. Animals have a right. The earth has a right. Nothing in nature exists without its God-given right and purpose. What a beautiful rationale for rashad or rectitude in our troubled times. Now coming back to Nahnu nuqussu alayka naba'ahum bil haqq. If we take to heart that only Allah has the right to tell the story about the past, and in its essence, we can free ourselves of the distraction and divisiveness held in historical facts. Historical facts are merely human perspectives. The Quran tells this wondrous story of the young men of the cave, but when it comes to the question of how many were in the cave, the Quran comments on the diverse postulations of those who claim to know. They are to say 3, the 4th of them their dog. Others will say 5, their dog the 6th of them, dabbling in the unverifiable. And some will say 7, the 8th of them being their dog. Say, my Rabb knows best their number. None but a few have any real knowledge of them. then the Quran counsels not to solicit such opinions. To a passing traveler, the value of a tree is its shade, not its lumber. Likewise, spiritual seekers have no urge to pinpoint the meeting place of two seas, where Moses met Khidr. They are happy to leave it on its mystical coordinates. They'll be happier still if they can locate the meeting space inside of them. Our consciousness is at the meeting point of the empirical and the non-empirical realms. We also have the seas of our two intellects, the intellect of the mind, which rejects all false gods, and the intellect of the heart that embraces the one, the eternal. Moses and Khidr themselves symbolize the seas of the Zahir, the sensory reality, and the Batin, the underlying reality beyond our sensory reality. Even before the journey starts, there's a symbolic meeting or interplay between the food for the body and the food for the spirit. The starting point of the journey for Rushd is right where Moses had lost his morning meal. And where was this? The meeting place of the two seas. We must also leave Khidr to his mystical coordinates. By the way, we call him Khidr, meaning green or evergreen, only for ease in our referring to him in our ample discussions. He is nameless in the Quran. The Quran says of him when Hazrat Musa finds him, فَوَجَدَ عَبْدًا مِّنْ عِبَادِنَا آتَيْنَاهُ رَحْمَةً مِّنْ عِنْدِنَا وَعَلَّمْنَاهُ مِن لَدُنَّا إِلْمًا. And thus they found a servant from amongst our many servants. We had given him mercy from us, and we also taught him knowledge directly from our own exclusive realm or exclusive domain. Ladun is a special Arabic word. It implies possession as well as nearness. When the phrase is min indina, it means from us. When the phrase is min ladunna, it means a little more than from us. It adds the meaning of directness and closeness. And because nothing is ever absent to God, we understand min ladunna to mean from Allah's exclusive domain. Let me say it this way. If we see the rain falling from the clouds, we know it is from God, but it is made within our domain. We can explain it and even predict it. But if water is falling from the clear blue sky, then it is coming directly from His exclusive domain. We will struggle to explain, much less predict it. The knowledge given to Khidr was from Allah's exclusive time-independent domain, in which the future exists with the past and the present. We, on the other hand, must do with what we know and what we can know. And by the way, for all those postulations, whether Khidr was man or angel or another being, or whether he is still alive, these are mere distractions. Allah has infinite soldiers and agencies. وَلِلَّهِ جُنُودُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَكَانَ اللَّهُ عَزِيزًا حَكِيمًا. To Allah belongs the forces of the heavens and the earth. Allah is almighty, ever wise. Why am I saying all of this? Because we are to be mindful that we are the flock of Hazrat Musa, Hazrat Isa, and Hazrat Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Peace be on all of them. They are our role models, not Khidr. We may have to make a hole in a boat or burn our ships for a strategy, but under no circumstances are we to ever punish anyone for a crime they have not yet committed. And we need witnesses before we can convict anyone of any crime. And we need not be looking for Khidr. The Quran is our teacher of rushd. Remember, when the jinn heard the recital, they observed it guides towards rushd. Yahdi ila rushd. It is also sound judgment to note that if someone has a name to him, much less anything to his name, he is not Khidr. If he has an address or a following, he is not Khidr. Why am I saying that? We have events in our past history which take us in this wrong understanding. With that sense and our limited time, let's embed ourselves in the journey between Hazrat Musa and Khidr and glean a lesson or two about rushd. Let us first recall the mere sequence of Khidr's 3 acts as they happened before Khidr explained why. Khidr makes the hole in the boat, then he slays a young boy, and finally, despite being denied basic food from a community, he voluntarily repairs the wall belonging to them. Let us learn from Hazrat Musa first. With each of his first 2 protests, Hazrat Musa may have broken his pledge to Khidr to remain silent, but his reaction was consistent with a moral duty. Aren't we taught by a teaching of our Prophet that a righteous man cannot remain unmoved by an obvious wrong or injustice? He must stop it. He must intervene to stop it if he has the capacity to do so. If not, he must speak out. If he's not able to do that, he must keep alive his internal protest. Hazrat Musa had spoken out. So for the first 2 acts, Hazrat Musa did right by the teaching of our Prophet. But nothing in the Quran can be put into a simple box. There is another precious rider here to this lesson that we just took. Even though Hazrat Musa's first 2 protests were proper in his perspective, he is not in a position to judge Khidr. We find out after Khidr relates his reasons that Khidr's intervention was also in line with the same teaching of our Prophet. In fact, he intervened with his hand to stop the injustice. Khidr had also lived up to the teaching of our Prophet and to its fullest. So another lesson in rushd, which is rather easy to forget. We cannot judge the intentions of others because we cannot know them with certainty. Now let's glean a spiritual lesson from Khidr as our teacher. The rectitude of Hazrat Musa's first 2 protests notwithstanding, Hazrat Musa wanted the journey to continue. So for him not to be able to maintain his silence, each following incident must have presented an escalating challenge to his instincts. The escalation in the first 2 is quite obvious. From making a hole in the boat, the second act rose to the seemingly cold-blooded killing of an innocent boy. How could Moses not protest? The bearer or bearer-to-be of the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill," is a witness to a capital offense. He could not remain silent. So what was the insurmountable escalation in the third one? Khidr did not harm anyone. He merely repaired a tottering wall. First, we must consider in Hazrat Musa's defense that he may have been moved by concern for his teacher, thinking that if Khidr was worldly wise, he would have no need to beg for food. And Hazrat Musa could also be speaking for the gift and right of service and fair wage. But because we find ourselves in this one condition, we must consider if our similar reaction would have been triggered by our hunger or our inability to forgive the unkindness of a people. After all, being spurned is the most difficult to forget, and a grudge is the most impossible thing to bury. That for us is the test of ihsan, which is doing good beyond the call of duty in devotion to God. We are to acknowledge that we often begrudge those who do not treat us like we expect to be treated, withholding our own better behavior towards them. In doing so, we do no wrong, but we miss out on the spiritual windfall of ihsan. It is also a part of sound judgment to remind ourselves that Allah had willed that this journey be brief, despite Hazrat Musa's best efforts. His two devoted servants were on two different missions. Part of rushd, or sound judgment, is to know one's purpose in the grand scheme. This beautiful verse spoken by Khidr before the journey had even begun speaks to both of them. We find both solace and inspiration in it. وَكَيْفَ تَصْبِرُوا عَلَى مَا لَمْ تُحِطْ بِهِ خُبْرًا. How can you be patient over what you cannot fathom for it being outside of your awareness? Khidr seems to understand our limitations. There is solace in that Allah does not task us beyond our capacity. We are accountable only for the sincerity of our intentions and what is within our jurisdiction. Yet, there is also an unmistakable invitation to faithful perseverance. If we find ourselves impatient, and we do, we should remind ourselves that our impatience could be for our lack of knowing. Lack of faithful perseverance is certainly always for the lack of certainty, yaqeen, in His mercy. With certainty in His mercy, perseverance takes the form of Hazrat Yaqub's sabrun jamilun, lovely patience. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين. A lasting reminder from the story of Hazrat Musa and Khidr is that we experience things in snapshots of time through stages of progression. We will, in fact, not see the whole until we have run out the span of time. The whole is mercy. Take these original words to heart. I will not dare to diminish these words by any translation. Kataba ala nafsihi, kataba ala nafsihi al-rahma, kataba ala nafsihi al-rahma. His mercy was on course when Hazrat Yusuf was in the well. His mercy was on course when the 6-year-old fatherless Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was on the road from Medina to Makkah with his mother when she died midway in the journey. In the fullness of time, the heart and house of Jacob would heal and become whole, and the orphan child would bear proof and consolation for millions of other children to follow him, that Allah shelters the orphan. And the orphan who never climbed a father's shoulders and had little time in a mother's lap would deliver a message in which love and duty to parents comes only after love and duty to Allah. Inna Allaha wa malaikatahu yusalluna ala nabi ya ayyuhallazina amanu sallu alayhi wa sallimu taslima. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid. Allahumma barik ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama barakta ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid. The Quran defines the Rashidun while counseling the believers in Surah Hujurat about basic decency, trust, civic sense, duty, and plain etiquette, with the Prophet as the nexus and all of humanity as its scope. وَعْلَمُوا أَنَّ فِيكُمْ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ لَوْ يُطِيعُكُمْ فِي كَثِيرٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْرِ لَأَنِتُّمْ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ حَبَّبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْإِيمَانَ وَزَيَّنَّهُ فِي قُلُوبِكُمْ وَكَرَّهَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْكُفْرَ وَالْفُسُوقَ وَالْعِصْيَانَ أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الرَّاشِدُونَ. And know, I'm going to say, and realize that amongst you is the messenger of Allah. If he were to heed you in much of the undertakings, you would surely cause distress to yourselves, whereas Allah has endeared your faith to you and beautified it in your hearts, and made the denial of truth and the departure from moral norms and the disobedience to God unnatural to you. Such are the ones of sound judgment. If we approach the Quran to seek guidance for our wanting selves and not to judge others, God willing, we will realize the Prophet in the Quran. But for starters, I must hear it, receive it, and heed it, like the contemporaries of the Prophet did. Much in the Quran starts with the imperative, qul, meaning say. Every time I come across qul, I can, if my heart is open enough, hear the rest of the verse from the Prophet. Or, if I am a cold stone rationalist, I must necessarily change the meaning of qul to realize, so that I can hear it and heed it. I must not say what I do not heed. May Allah endear our faith to us. May Allah make our faith pure. May Allah purify our hearts and beautify our hearts with our faith. May Allah make al-kufr wal-fusuq wal-isyan unnatural to us. Ibadallah, inna Allah ya'muru bil adli wal ihsan wa ita'i zil qurba wa yanha 'anil fahsha'i wal munkar wal baghi ya'izukum la'allakum tadhakkarun. Aqim as-salat.